Hello, everyone. I'm the Bodacious Cowboy with my co-host, Christy Knichel. Are you ready for a special edition of the Storytelling Chronicles? We are. Let's go.
Look out! Pop, it's showtime. Showtime. Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Gone tell. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up. I'm wearing Cuban links. Yeah. Designer mix. Yeah. Inglewood's finest shoes. Whoop, whoop. Don't look too hard, might hurt yourself. Known to give the color red the blues.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Storytelling Chronicles, Powering Women into Logistics. This is episode 24. Alongside me is the best co-host I could ever have, Christy Knichel. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
You know what? I'm alive. I guess I'm doing well. Did you have a good weekend?
I did, but that didn't sound so good, Jeff. Have a lot going on, huh?
So much stuff going on, and we talked in the green room. It's just like I love multitasking, but sometimes it gets the best of you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsors, Taft's, Freight Validate, and Thai Software. So we have a really good guest today, Ellen Void. Let's talk a little bit about her.
Yeah, so Ellen, I've actually known her personally for, I want to say 12 years now. She was a champion of mine back in the day when I felt like there was really no women in the industry. So let's talk about Ellen Void here. She's the founder of the Women in Trucking Association, formed to promote the employment of women in the trucking industry, address obstacles, and to celebrate the success of its members. Void's prior role was manager of retention and recruiting programs at Schneider after serving as the executive director of Trucker Buddy International. Void is a certified association executive. She holds a Class A CDL and private pilot's license. She earned her MA in communication for the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. She has been honored by the White House as a transportation innovator, champion of change. She received the 2015 Distinguished Alumni of the Year award, the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point Division of Communication, and Void was named one of the Supply Chain in Demand Executives Magazine's 2016 Pros to Know. In May 2016, she was chosen as one of the Fleet Owners' Dozen Outstanding Women in Trucking. Void was appointed to the FMCSA's Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee and Entry-Level Driver Training Advisory Committee. She serves on the board of the directors of the Wisconsin Motor Carrier Association and is a member of the Wisconsin DOT's Motor Carrier Advisory Committee. So let's bring her on out.
Let's do this.
Hello.
Hello, Ellen. How
Thanks
are
for
you?
having me on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the last time that you were on my show was probably about 12, 13 months ago, somewhere around there.
Something like that, yeah.
A lot of things changed since then, hasn't it?
Yes.
Quite a bit, that's for sure. Well, why don't you start off by sharing with the guests, how you got into the industry, and kind of where you're at today and where are you going?
So often I ask, in the past, I used to stand up in front of women in the industry and ask if they wanted to be in supply chain or trucking in high school or college, and typically no one said yes. I'm seeing more and more that they are, but I was one of those. I actually went to school for radio broadcast journalism, and I worked at a radio station in Ohio, and because my mom got ill, so I moved back to Wisconsin, and I took a job at a steel fabricating plant in the drafting department. I had taken that in high school, so I was drawing material handling equipment. And they came to me one day and said, "Would you like to move into the traffic department?" And I'm like, "What's traffic?" And they said, "Well, we'll double your salary." And I'm like, "All right, let's do it." So this was around 1978, and they sent me to school for traffic and transportation management. I earned my diploma from LaSalle University. And I was assistant traffic manager. And then when my boss left, I became traffic manager, and I was probably about 19 years old. And it was just before deregulation. And it was, so material handling equipment, these are cantilever racks, these are pallets, these are warehouse type, steel products that are not easily damaged, right? But they're
Right.
very, very heavy. So before deregulation, when everything went by tariffs, everybody had to charge the same rate. And so our inbound steel and outbound material handling equipment was very highly sought by the carriers, and they didn't know how to treat me. So they'd come in and they would offer me pot. They would offer me dates with professional ball players. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I'd say, get out, just get out. It was a whole different, the world was so different then. And I was the only female traffic manager that I knew. So it was just a lot different. So I learned the school of hard knocks, I can tell you.
No better school.
The industry's come a long way since 1979. So deregulation was a positive, I think, and it made them start looking at costs and not just service, but costs as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you were probably one of the first women traffic managers out there. And when you look back then, we had the liquid lunches. Everybody went out I mean, that's the way and used to get a lot of gifts. I mean, top-notch gifts that as time went on, corporations said, you know what? We don't want favoritisms. You can't take anything over $25 now because, I mean, they used to give you some very expensive stuff. So, I mean, yeah, it was a different time that you and I worked back then. That is way different. I mean, let's look at the tools that we have today compared to what we had back then. I mean, you remember the 11 by 17 green bar paper that we had? Right? All the data, forecast monthly demands, all of that different kinds of stuff that we worked with. And the thing is that we got by, Ellen. We got by and we did very, very well under the circumstances. And even when you look at the tool, I want to get your feedback on this as well, is when you look at the tools today and the sophistication, how technology is moving forward at a rapid pace, why are we still having the problems that we're still having today that you and I never even really dealt with back then, but we got through it and we got through it well?
You know what hasn't changed? People. It's all about people. And if people don't realize that the trucking industry isn't about trucks and freight, and rates and things like that, and that has been the constant. Now the technology has changed. I mean, I remember to read a tariff, I actually had to look it up in a book, and freight rates, and remember the National Motor Freight Classification, I'd have to figure out, and of course they always tried, if we would have like steel plugs, they'd call it hardware, which is a higher rate. So I'd have to audit all the freight bills and read tariffs and things like that. Great skills. Yeah. Great skills. And last year I actually took the SMC3 LTL certification course and thought, oh, I should ace this because I lived through it. No. No, but that's partly because of the technology, because cubing out, and how we charge for freight these days is a lot different than, I have, it's, well, and another thing, Jeff, you probably remember this. I'm in Wisconsin. We couldn't go over 72-380 because every load went through Minnesota unless it went west. I'm sorry, Illinois.
Right.
West. So Illinois had a different maximum weight. And so we had to either send it, away from Illinois, which was hard when you're in Wisconsin. But yeah, less consistency between the states, much more difficult filings for all the taxes.
Oh yeah.
And when I for 18 years I did consulting to trucking companies while I raised my family. So the one thing that the carriers love to do is in December go out and buy a bunch of trucks for the tax write-off. So I'd be spending Christmas ordering bingo cards and stamps and, getting the Public Utilities Commission, and the International Fuel Tax Agreement forms, because they wanted to buy the trucks in December and it wasn't online like it is now. So yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna ask Christy this because I know you know the answer to this. Christy, do you know what a pony chart is?
A pony chart?
Yeah.
No, I don't know what that is.
That's what we used to get for rates. They were called pony rates that we used to get, and they usually came on this. And there was a whole list of them. You know, it was like before, like the Czar lights and the yellow 500Gs and all of that out there, that they had the different types of tariffs. But it was a whole different animal, and we had the floppy disk as well. What's a floppy disk, right? And and we thought that was great. We thought that was the world when that came out. And we also most of us started with AS400s, which after you got done with the day, if you sat there for 8 to 10 hours, you literally had to take your glasses off and go into a dark room because you see this green dot matrix in front of your eyes that lasted for hours on end. So I'm glad technology is going the way that it is. And as you said, Ellen, going through training with SMC3 and how that changed, it's unbelievable. It's just so unbelievable what we had and what we have today.
I have to tell you guys a funny story. I don't know that I've ever shared this before, but so working at a steel fabricating plant, what's everyone doing out there? They're welders, right? Well, in high school, I had taken shop class. That's how I knew how to do drafting. I knew how to do welding. I knew automotive. I knew, I knew woodworking. And so I'd walk through there with my hard hat on. And of course, the owner of the company painted a gold hard hat for me and put my name on there. So I'd walk through there and they'd be making cat calls at me. Oh, and they would be teasing me. And one time I said, "You are a bunch of wimps." I said, "You're using a wire feed welder. I learned on a stick feed. Let me show you how I know how to weld."
This is great.
And everybody came around me. I put on, the welder's hat, and I was welding a perfect bead. And they're like, "Oh, she knows what she's doing." And suddenly they were all my friends.
Love it. That's awesome.
That's awesome. That I don't think they said that. I think they used the choice words or something like that back then. I'm pretty sure they did.
Well, speaking of back then, I mean, I'm sure there wasn't many women, in the industry back then. And even going back to you talking about being a consultant, like any of the companies that you worked with back then still in business now?
Actually, yes. And so for 18 years, I did the consulting. I licensed and permitted them. I did their fuel taxes. I did driver qualification files, audited logbooks, things like that. But some of them have grown considerably. Some are out of business, though, to your point, Christy, because some were one truck operations. But it was a good income for 18 years while I raised my kids and got my degrees.
There you go.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you definitely have an interesting journey. So we all know, you founded Women in Trucking. So what led you to do that in the first place? And I think I met you not long before that existed, I want to say, because I won that first Distinguished Women in Logistics Award. And I know you were my cheerleader then. And so I'm thinking it was around that time, right?
Yeah, that you were our very first Distinguished Woman in Logistics. And that must have been like around 2010, because I started Women in Trucking in 2007, but I was actually working at Schneider and I was manager of retention and recruiting programs. And they said, figure out how to attract and retain non-traditional groups. And that included Hispanics, returning military, seniors, and women. And so I had to do the research on what can we do to bring in returning military or Hispanics or seniors. And I started focusing on women, and it's like, oh, well, why aren't we like shouting from the rooftops that we had our own operating centers with fenced in and security guards and with delis and showers and fitness equipment, and why weren't we, talking about that? Well, anyway, so I, as you mentioned earlier, I have a private pilot certificate. And so I was getting my private pilot's license at the time, and it belonged to Women in Aviation. And I thought, well, I belong to this great association. I get to network with them. They do an annual photo at the air show where they bring everyone in and give them all a t-shirt and like, oh, I like this. So I thought, why isn't there something for women in the trucking industry? Put together an amazing board. And Jeff, I don't know if you remember, and Christy, you might, Lana Batts was president of Truckload Carriers Association. Went to her. She was a pioneer in the industry. Yep. Put together some pretty strong, influential women in the industry. put together the board of directors. We wrote our mission statement. In March of 2007, Women in Trucking was born. And in the first year, the goal was to hit 500 members. And I wasn't working for Women in Trucking. I had my assistant, Shar. She was the only employee. But when you start a nonprofit, oh, and by the way, it was in the middle of a recession.
Nice time to start something.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
No.
But so the goal was 500 members the first year. And so I was still working at Schneider, and then worked my way. Finally, I did. After 2 years, I started getting paid by Women in Trucking. But we hit that. We hit the 500 mark. And the first year, people joined because they knew me from Trucker Buddy, or they knew somebody on the board, and they said, you know, you've got a pretty credible board there. Let's see what you can do. But the second year, I mean, I was told straight out, you better do what you say you're going to do. You better walk the walk and provide networking opportunities, provide educational information, you know, give us what an association should be doing. And we did. And so it's grown, and it's, I think, over 8,000 members in 10 countries.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got a quick question for you, and I think I asked you probably 13 months ago. At the time, the split of supporting men in Women in Trucking or Accelerate was about 14.5 to 15%. Has that increased over the last year?
Actually, yes. I heard at the conference that the percentage of men is up to 20% at Women in Trucking.
There you go.
So,
Yeah.
But you know what the biggest difference is between then and now in regard to the men who are our allies?
Mm.
In the beginning, it was, well, we hadn't thought about half the population, but yeah, good idea. We can, you know, we need more drivers. We need more talent, you know, safety directors, whatever. So yeah, let's bring in women. The difference now is, wow, this is what women bring to this industry. Risk averse, safer drivers, better with customers, better with paperwork. Great at multitasking. Think about safety directors. And now the attitude is, we understand what women bring into this industry and how to help us bring in more women and retain women. So that's the biggest change I've seen.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Retaining the women in this industry. You know, what are you hearing out there, and what have you seen works and doesn't work? Because that's been a challenge, I think, depending on who you work for and what type of job it is.
So I'm going to talk about the driver population first, Christy, if that's okay, because Women in Trucking represents all women in the industry like you. But for the drivers, it's a different challenge because there's more of a physical component to the job. But the biggest difference between female drivers and male drivers is women are looking for a company that has their back and cares about them and values them as an individual. Men are looking for pay parity. So men want to know that if you get a gravy load, I need a gravy load. Women will leave a company if they don't get along with their dispatcher or think the dispatcher doesn't care about them as a human. And the safety part of it, there's three parts to the safety aspect. The first is how well maintained is the equipment. You know, if you have a company where there's a breakdown, that's not safe. The second is, where are you sending them? Like, what kind of locations? Is it a dark part of town? Is it a warehouse, or is it New York City or the Bronx or whatever? And third, are they the captain of their own ship? So during, like, let's say during the protests, I mean, I still have a Qualcomm message from a carrier saying, well, if you approach a protest, don't stop. And if you hit someone, wait until you get out of there to call 911. Which is, who wants to work for a company like that? And other companies are like, well, this is trucking, so I don't care if there's 15 inches of snow or a hurricane or whatever. You don't want to work for a company like that. So women are looking for a company that values them as a human. And I'm generalizing because I'm not saying that men don't want that, but I'm saying that women value that relationship more than men. So to retain women, it would be listening to them, asking them how you can accommodate them, whether it's female cut uniforms, restrooms for women. A new one that I encountered that I hadn't thought I would ever encounter is, how do you accommodate a breastfeeding, someone who's pumping? How do you, she's got a cooler with her and you've got a camera that's inward facing, what do you do? So things like that, this industry needs to change its mindset and say, wow, these are some things that we need to do to accommodate the women in the industry.
I think it has to do with changing mindsets, because it's a male dominant industry. I mean, I'm not preaching to the choir. We all know that. But I think they don't think of these type of things. And maybe they just don't have the type of women like yourself on the board that can explain the reasons why behind this, that would make them see and understand why it's important to them. It may not be important to them, but it is to the women that are moving America, and sometimes you have to, like yourself, I know you're hard, fast, and you say it the way it is, and you don't pull back. And I think that's what they need on the board. More people like yourself, Ellen.
Well, and Christy, women love to see more women in leadership roles because it comes from the top. So if women in leadership recognize, like, oh, well, we need to accommodate these drivers in this way, and it might be, breastfeeding or restrooms or whatever it is, women will look to the leadership to recognize what their needs are. And so when you have more women in leadership, that not only will flow down, but it brings more women in because they see that and they think, this is a female-friendly company.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, even with my company, 70% of my employees are women, and I do feel like because my presence out there, like, I drive women to want to come work for me because other environments are maybe different. Not saying they're bad, it's just a different environment. So going back to the whole breastfeeding that you just talked about, or, we have to provide space here for women to do that, obviously, but in a trucking environment, they probably, I would assume, have to go into a restroom or something at a truck stop, right? Or something along those lines, and who really wants to do that? So, like, do you know, I'm just curious, like, what are companies doing out there about that in particular? And I guess ones that don't have women involved, do you feel like there's enough word getting out there that if they provide these certain things, they'll have women that want to come drive for them? Okay.
No, and we get contacted by a lot of people doing research, and I don't remember her name. Her dad works in the trucking industry, but she was doing her research on how do trucking companies accommodate pregnancy for drivers. She couldn't get anyone to respond. So that tells me we still have a ways to go.
And I'll say too, like, as we got bigger as a company, there's things that we had to adjust in our policy and make more flexible. And then also, like, I want to say in the past, we also have fathers here, but giving time off to them and taking them into consideration too. But sometimes those things don't come up until someone asks, or, you have to go look at those things. But again, I feel like in some of these companies, I think if they want to bring more women on, they have to be more aware of those things that they need. And like you said, whether it's a safe environment that they're going into, or where can they shower? Like, again, I think we talked about that at some point, like maybe not all truck stops have that for women in particular. Maybe it's better today, but I think it's interesting that you draw such a crowd to your conference, which was just last week. So I think that that's definitely, getting the word out there in particular. So I just like to hear, like, how do you think the industry is evolved since you first started Women in Trucking to, like, where it is today? Like, what are some significant things you've seen?
So a lot of women my age or older felt that they had to adapt to fit into the industry instead of asking the industry to adapt to them. And I see that especially in the driver population, where some of the seasoned drivers, when a new driver comes in and says, well, I want vegan food at the truck stop, and the seasoned driver will go, you're lucky you have a shower. We didn't have showers. You know what I mean? It's like the ones who have been in the industry a while are aghast that the newer people to the industry are asking for things that they would have never considered. So I love it. I love it that the younger, I'll say newer, not necessarily younger, but newer drivers are saying, we need this, we want this. And the older, the women who were in the industry 20, 30 years ago would never, they just wanted to fit in and be unnoticed. They
Right.
just wanted to do their job, didn't want to draw attention to them. And just, and in fact, I remember I had two women pulling flatbed come in with a load of raw steel when I was the traffic manager. And they were, it was like, don't let anyone notice us. You know, don't let the guys in the shop see that it's two female drivers, but can we use your restroom because you don't have a women's restroom up on the shop floor? And I'm like, absolutely. But now women are much more visible and much more vocal. And that to me is a good thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, that's true. And one woman who's a very good friend of mine, I think she's an unbelievable standout, is Ingrid Brown. I mean, she's been around for so long, and you just pretty much explain who that person is without saying it, because that's her. She goes about her business. She's been around. She got eyes in the back of her head. She's very cognizant of her surroundings. She knows what she wants to do, what she doesn't want to do. And she's a lifer. She's been driving for very, very long, like 42, 43 years.
Yeah, I've known Ingrid for probably 25 years, and she's even been battling cancer.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And she is now on the board of directors of Women in Trucking.
It's awesome.
Yeah. She did tell me that. I actually just recruited her to another board, the Broker Carrier Summit.
Oh, really?
There you go.
Yeah, well, they're trying to bring brokers and carriers together, and I'm like, what better way than to have another woman carrier, on the board? It's the Women in Logistics group, because just trying to get that voice out there too. I feel like a lot of the different conferences that are out there now, just trying to set that up for women so that they have a place to, speak their mind and talk with other like-minded individuals. Not that, again, that men can't be those people too, but I think sometimes with women, they enjoy having that space. And I know she was super excited about it. And what I love about her too is she tries to help the industry, especially since she's in that truck. And I remember Jeff and I interviewed her not that long ago, but she talked about, because I told her, I said, when you go to a truck stop and you run into like other women, are you all like, yeah, like another woman? And she said, it's not like that. It's almost like standoffish in a sense sometimes. So I thought that was interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that either, but maybe it depends on if they're a friend of yours or if they're someone from another company or whatever. But wow, that's interesting.
I think one of the biggest problems with men is that they're emotionally detached. They don't understand the other side, are willing to understand the other side. And that's why it's great, Christy, that you've asked Ingrid to be part of the Broker Carrier Summit, which I've been part of almost since its inception. But men need to hear that side and to really understand and get that emotional intelligence that they're lacking, because the more you know, the better off you'll be. And the more that you'll be able to collaborate instead of being out here, you're finally going to get to here and saying, you know what, we might be different genders, but we're still human beings. Let's treat each other such, we're not different. We're different, but we're not really that different.
You know who the biggest advocates I've met are men who have had daughters, and they will come up to me and say, we totally support what you're doing, because now that I have a daughter, I want the world to be a better place for her. So it's just pretty amazing how that perspective can change once you have a daughter, because then you start looking at the world through her eyes.
True.
Yeah. And I would say Jeff actually approached me about doing this podcast with him because he thought it was so important to talk about empowering women. And he has a daughter himself, and he's a huge advocate for women, which is great because we talk about this all the time. We need men lifting women up too and making them feel that they're part of this, space that we're in together to work together to achieve the same goals at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, when when I started way back when, there was this lady who started up the first 3PL operation, and I was a first customer, and I helped her grow that business, and help her promote that even 40 years ago, and she's still in business today, and she goes, I owe you so. I says, you don't owe me nothing. It's not about that, because she did a lot of favors for me. I did a lot of favors for her. She needed more loads. I gave her more loads, help her out. That's what's missing in this economy here, is that, people are diving to the bottom, as you well know, trying to get the cheapest rates, and they're not supporting, whether it's men or women, throughout the year through good and bad. They're just looking at, hey, what's best for me? No, I'm sorry, you can't operate that way in this business, because you're going to fail miserably. So you got to support the women out there, more than anything out there. Seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. So what would you say, talk a little bit about last week? What was some of the highlights of the event?
So first of all, to have over 2,000 people is just amazing. I think it's the largest conference. Even I saw Ann Reinke from TIA, and I think Women in Trucking has even, exceeded TIA, which I told Ann one time. I said, we're going to beat you.
It has exceeded TIA, and she's going over to IANA now.
I know, she told me that.
Good person.
Yeah. So first of all, to think that it's one of the, if not the largest conference in the trucking industry that really focuses on women's issues, that's pretty amazing. That means this industry sees a need to get more women in the industry. And I think the goal in the future is to not have women's conferences, not have women's, it would be like, let's just talk trucking. Let's not talk about, let's not break it down by gender, but we still need the level playing field. But the other thing, Christy, and you've been at our conference, there's an electricity in the room. There's an atmosphere in the room that is not there at other conferences. Other conferences are like, oh my gosh, we've got regulations, we've got driver issues, we've got insurance, we've got fuel prices, we've got blah, blah, blah. At our conference, it's more like, let's look at solutions, and let's look at the world and how we can make it a better place. And I really feel like it's a much more positive. There may be a panel on truck parking, but it's like, all right, let's put our heads together. We can solve this. It's not like, woe is me, the sky is falling. It's just a different atmosphere. And one of the things that I'm especially proud of is, so when I started Women in Trucking in 2007, carriers were like, well, Ellen, we don't care what gender they are. And I'm like, well, you should, and now we had a panel 2 years ago, an LGBTQIA+ panel. And it was the head of Transgender New York. Forget her name off the top of my head, Dr. Jen. Anyway, she moderated this panel, and she said, Ellen, I feel so welcome here, and it's like, okay, what other carrier conference are you going to have a panel talking about trans issues, LGBTQIA issues? You're not going to have that at typically a trucking panel. But how is this industry accommodating these, I'll say, drivers or these professionals? What are we doing to better understand them? And I had a trucking company president come up to me and he said, I'm sure that was difficult for you. He said, but it made us talk. He said, and when our first transgender driver applied, he goes, we were ready. That's what I want to hear. I want people to think, be ready.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, I think what you're saying is completely true. And I think when you're in a room with a bunch of women in particular and the men are outnumbered, it is a different vibe. And it's a different vibe the other way. I go to the big WBENC conference and it's literally like 4,000 women and maybe like 100 men or something. But it's funny because they have the little parties, right? And all the women are up there dancing and partying. And you don't see that at a typical conference either. But I know
no gender like this.
Yeah. Checking everything out.
You
Oh,
see,
yeah.
No, I agree.
point, though.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a great point, though. What you're bringing up, you're talking about the excitement and the vibes and everything. Why can't you just have that with men and women instead of them having that excitement when there's more women than men? It shouldn't be that way. And it shouldn't be more excitement when there's more men than women and stuff like that, maybe for one reason or another, you know what I mean? But still, that goes on and it shouldn't go on. There's no reason for that today. There really isn't. And it's sad. It's really sad. I mean, with, like you said, with my daughter and stuff like that, if she felt like she was not equal, yeah, you would kind of be standoffish. You shouldn't feel that way. Truly, it's just ridiculous.
yeah, I mean, do you think, Ellen, like, obviously it's gotten better, but we're not there yet. Like, do you feel it'll ever get there?
That's a great question. We're not there yet because there's still people just in my age, um, mostly boomers, who have some level of anxiety about women entering their space. And here's some of the comments I've heard. This came from a truck driver, big burly guy. Okay, he's like, it really hurts his ego when he sees someone 5'2" like Ingrid Brown hop out of a long nosed tractor trailer. Because yeah. But the other thing is, in the corporate world, in the past, it was more like women had to fit in, and the companies that are more progressive are the ones who will accommodate the workplace to women. And I'll give you an example. I was on a panel with a gentleman who, huge logistics company, and he said, Ellen, he goes, one of my top CEOs is a woman who gets very emotional. Okay, so I thought he was going to say she needed to get over it, right? Instead, he said, I needed to learn to understand her. And that just gave me chills up and down my spine. You wouldn't have heard that 20 years ago. You would have wanted the woman to fit into the work environment. Instead, he's saying, we are going to adapt the work environment because we know she's an emotional person. That to me is exciting. We're not there yet, Christy, and all, but the companies that are really thinking about it are the ones that will adapt the environment to accommodate women instead of making women adapt to their environment.
That burly guy, if he had a daughter, he wouldn't feel that way.
If he had what? A daughter?
If he had a daughter, would not feel that way. If she went up to her dad and said, Dad, I want to learn how to be a truck driver.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? I think part of that goes back to old school mentality, like you said, boomers, right? Like where my dad's like, you need to go find a guy that's in a suit, and like he didn't want me working, but yet I worked alongside him. Like, so it's kind of interesting, to hear that. But I think that's part of, where that comes from back in the day. And like the man has to be, I don't want to say superior. I don't know if that's the right word, but almost like, it's like if a woman can hop out of there 5'2", like you said, and like that's crazy. It's almost like they just don't believe they can do it. But interesting enough, one of the things I did, just to go back to what you talked about, women being emotional, and we have a lot of women here. And John, who's a man, runs my company. So we had a leadership coach that was a woman. Actually, she was at your event, Ruth, from Wise Leader, and John had asked me, can I work with her to better understand and work with the women here? Awesome. Because all the women, reported up to him. And again, we talk about emotions where men don't, typically wear them on their sleeves, so to speak, here. And so you think they're non-emotional, but John also taught me that men are emotional too. They just show it in different ways, which I thought was interesting, because typically when you talk about like women and emotion, like crying and those type of things, but now, I mean, I talk about this quite a bit because I do think it's important that like John actually showed an interest in how do I better work with women, because I'm working with a lot of them. He didn't have to do that, but he did because he cared about it, because he struggled with it. And at least he wanted to. Yeah, that too. So I'm hoping that people learn from that, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, you have to work together mostly, so how do you make that a better situation for both of you?
if you want me sharing, Valerie Alexander wrote a book, How to Survive in the Workplace Despite Having Female Brains. And one of the stories that she tells kind of lays it out. So men are the monkeys. Maybe you've heard me say this, but men are the monkeys and women are the penguins. Okay. And the penguin employee, the monkey boss, the monkey said to the penguin, hey, I want to advance you. I want to meet with you. Let's meet every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And the penguin's like, yes, I get to meet with the boss every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And the monkey goes, at the top of the tree. And the penguin gets there at 5 in the morning, climbs, it's out of their environment, gets to the top, is sitting on the tree like, oh my gosh, this is so uncomfortable. Monkey climbs up and goes, what's wrong with you? You're already worn out. You don't look like you fit in here. What's your problem? That's the world we live in for women, because we are fitting into this environment. If the monkey had said, let's go sit on an ice floe, then we would have been happy. You know?
Right.
But I love that illustration because we all know, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but the business world was designed by men. And that's why there aren't lactating rooms. There aren't enough women's restrooms, so we have to say, these have to change and we have to speak up.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We have a couple commercials for our sponsors, and then we will be right back. We will start off with
Well,
I can do TAFs. That's fine.
what's that?
We're
Tap. Yeah, there we go.
TAFs Inc., which provides transportation factoring solutions to boost profits and increase cash flow for small and medium-sized companies. Contact TAFs at tafs.com to elevate your financial success.
Brokering, success demands a battle-ready strategy. Thai TMS equips brokers with the ultimate battle station for conquering a tough market. With Thai, brokers gain access to a comprehensive platform where rate intelligence and quote history converge on a single screen. It's not just a page, it's a strategic command center designed to help brokers win. Thai equips your team with all the data they need to negotiate with confidence and allows them to communicate directly with carriers and customers from a simple control base. Revolutionize the way your brokers perform by giving them a competitive advantage with Thai TMS. For more info, scan the QR code or go to thai-software.com/battlestation.
Freight Validate ensures compliance and mitigates fraud risks in the logistics industry. At freightvalidate.com, you can quickly and easily verify entities' compliance status.
Freight Validate, revolutionizing identity and compliance verification for shippers, brokers, and motor carriers with cutting-edge technology. Now, experience the power of voice-activated information retrieval with Siri and Alexa. Hey Siri, check Freight Validate.
Sure, what's the MC number?
387211.
The company Direct Expedite LLC is a broker and is freight validated. Company ownership has completed facial recognition verification. Basic company identity verification, risk assessment, and compliance info has been verified by freightvalidate.com. Please follow company protocols for additional safety and compliance vetting. For more information, please go to freightvalidate.com.
Freight Validate ensures complete access to our state-of-the-art identity and compliance verification system. Speed, accuracy, and savings all in one package. Don't miss out. Upgrade to Freight Validate today. Fraud starts with fraud. It ends with Freight Validate.
And TAFs, which provides transportation factoring solutions to boost profits and increase cash flow for small and medium-sized companies. Contact TAFs at tafs.com to elevate your financial success.
trucking excellence meets unparalleled service. Enjoy exclusive benefits like our fantastic tire discounts. Need cash fast? Try our 1-hour advances. Plus, we're here for you 365 days a year. Need loads? We have a pro dispatch service. This is why TAFS was recognized as the top factoring company in 2023. You'll benefit from strategic partnerships for enhanced operations. Access business loans and manage your finances easily with our client portal, F2 Fuel Card, and mobile app. At TAFS Factoring, we're more than just a factoring company. We're your partner in success. Contact us today to see how we can help your trucking business thrive.
And we are back. Sorry, I had a coughing attack. I couldn't do it. I was just
like, what's happening? But this is what happens when you're live.
Oh, jeez. Oh, God. So go ahead.
No, it's all good. So I guess getting back to a great discussion we just had but last week, like what would you say your, I don't know, your favorite moment of last week was?
Well, I got to introduce, it was Veterans Day on Monday, and that was the opening session. And so I got to talk about how Women in Trucking works with veterans organizations, and then introduce Sarah Lee from Waypoint Vets. And she shared her story, and the veterans in the audience stood up. So I think I'm glad that we recognized that on Veterans Day. And I think that was for me, that was pretty empowering. I also got to do the lunch with a leader. So people would sit at my table at lunch and they could ask me questions, and that's always fun as well. So, and I moderated a panel, and it was a women's business insight. So that was fun as well. So it was a great conference, lots of breakout sessions, lots of partying.
Yeah, I saw pictures.
Lots of fun. They had Celebrate Hollywood on Monday night. That was fun, and it was just the best part, I guess. In addition to those, was seeing all my tribe. 2,000 people, and if they weren't a friend already, they're a potential friend to me. So because they're all there to support our mission and our the association. So I call them my tribe.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, we always talk, Nicole Glenn, I know you know her well too, but we always talk about the tribe. Find your tribe of women that you have, and which is great. So one thing we haven't talked about is the foundation. Can you talk a little bit about that, what that is, and how can people get involved? Sure.
So, and thank you for asking that, Christy, because a lot of people don't realize that Women in Trucking has a scholarship foundation. And the foundation actually had a booth at our conference, and people kept coming up and asking questions about the association. So the association is a 501c6, which we call a membership-based organization. And the foundation is a 501c3, which means it's a charitable organization. And so any money donated to the foundation goes to scholarships. And the scholarships are for women seeking career opportunities in 4 areas. First is commercial driving, of course. So someone getting a CDL. And then second would be safety. Somebody may be getting their certified director of safety, working on that. The third is any diesel tech. Ryder gives $25,000 every year, and any women applying for diesel maintenance tech are almost assured of getting a scholarship. And then the fourth one we loosely define as leadership. So it's any woman working in the trucking industry who wants to advance her career. Maybe she's working on an MBA, maybe she's working on whatever, she can apply. And they've given out the scholarship foundation. Women in Trucking was formed in 2007. The foundation was formed in 2010. And it was actually formed because Gina Heisel was named the Ohio Safety Director of the Year. And she received a check. And she handed me the check, and she said, "I want you to give this out as a scholarship." And I thought, oh boy, now I have to start a foundation. But the foundation has a separate board of directors, separate management. It's got an association management firm that manages it. And they've given out, I think, so far over $150,000 in scholarships. And the scholarships are $1,000 each. And you can apply. I've seen some women going for diesel techs will apply 2 or 3 times because, you know, the application can be submitted every 6 months. So if your training lasts 2 years, why not apply, you know, for 2 or 3 times? So it's womenintruckingfoundation.org.
Nice.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
So
got-
go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. So our sponsors, what we're doing, Ellen, I'm not sure you know this, but we're taking all the money that we get every single month and we're going to give it back to a certain individual. You know, that's why it's called Empowering Women. We don't know exactly what foundation or a single person. It's so hard, right? There's so many people that are worthy of, you know, a scholarship program or training or something like that. So we have a pretty good fund, and Christy and I are going to figure that out. And, you know, the beginning of next year, we're going to choose an organization or a single person and help them move up, level up a little bit.
Well, I hope Women in Trucking Foundation will be in the running.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, now that you said it, definitely is something that makes sense for sure, because I think that's something we've talked about for quite some time, just figuring out what do we do with this to help someone out there or several people, to be quite honest, with what we're trying to do. So, but yeah, it was just kind of something that just came up out of nowhere and trying to figure that out. So. But the question I wanted to ask you is, if there was one thing that you could change in transportation in the industry, what do you think is the most compelling thing? I know there's a lot, but like, what do you feel is the most compelling?
Driver training. I think that we need to stop being gender blind in regarding putting female trainees with male trainers. I think that's absolutely ludicrous to send them out in the cab of a truck for weeks at a time and expect them to share sleeping quarters. So I think that we need to either, I mean, there's different solutions, but a same gender training policy, and we actually have a white paper on this at Women in Trucking, or some companies use day cabs and in their training process. And so then they stay in hotels so that both the trainer and the trainee are in a hotel. Other companies such as Schneider will put one of them in a hotel if they're opposite gender. So, but there are still companies that expect them to sleep in the cab of the truck. And that to me is just, so Christy, I'm glad you asked that question, because we need to get away from mixing genders. And it used to be, and Jeff, you can relate to this. It used to be, do you smoke? Do you smoke? Fine. You put the smokers in one cab and the non-smokers in another, right? That's how you match them. And I had a friend whose husband was a trainer years and years ago. And any female trainee, he would ask his wife to come and sit down and have lunch with so the three of them would have lunch. And if his wife said no, then he told the company, I'm not training that woman. And the company was okay with that. But we need some kind of, I don't know, some kind of policy that allows women to ask for a female trainer if that's what they want.
Yeah, almost like a standardization policy that has to be followed as like a state law or something. Yeah, because to me, that's just like a no-brainer. But, you know, interesting. I mean, this might not be that funny, but like when I used to go on sales calls with my dad, he made me stay in the same room with him. Now we had separate beds, but I had to stay in the same room with him. Not granted, he was my dad,
but what if it wasn't your dad? You know,
exactly. I would not feel comfortable at all. And I don't know that the other person would feel comfortable either. I mean, I didn't even feel comfortable with my dad, and it was my dad just because I wanted like my privacy, right? But I understood it, you know, because we're family business at the time or whatever. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like, to me, that's a no-brainer. And I don't know why that's not something. So speaking of that, that kind of throws me into something else. Like, obviously, I know you've gone to, you know, Washington, D.C. and stuff. Is this something that you've been advocating with them in regards to this? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was actually the government that made this happen, because Prime Inc. in Springfield, Missouri, had a same gender training policy, and their sexual harassment went way down. But if a man went there, he would get a trainer faster than if a woman went there. it might take longer for her to get a trainer. So the EEOC sued the company for millions of dollars, and they lost. And so now the other carriers are like, well, we don't want to be sued by the government, because they said it was an unequal playing field to get women trained. So we've got to come up with some solutions. And I'd be happy even if it was inward facing cameras in the cab, not the sleeper, but, inward facing cameras so that at least only for driver training. I'm not talking about on a day-to-day basis, but maybe for driver training, separate rooms, hotels, whatever. But something needs to be done because way too many women are being harassed or worse during the training process.
Yeah, no, that definitely to me is a no-brainer, and I don't understand why companies wouldn't think. But then again, like you said, sometimes men don't think that that's maybe a need or not a big deal, to be quite honest. But I see that as a big issue that definitely needs to be resolved for sure.
I concur.
Working on it. Well, and the women of you probably know I got a bill passed, and it was the Women in the Workforce Act, and it created a Women of Trucking Advisory Board, and they had a 2-year appointment. It's done, but mostly what they talked about was harassment for 2 years. Yeah. And if that's still the biggest issue for women in this industry, we still have a long ways to go.
So the board doesn't exist anymore? The board doesn't exist anymore?
It was a 2-year appointment.
So don't you think that should be brought up again and have a board that's consistent all the time that can deal with these type of problems that you talk about?
Well, so the Federal Motor Carrier Safety, this was actually a legislative initiative. And so the 2-year appointment, they have now sent the report back to the legislature to act on it. So you can find it on the FMCSA website. They actually have recommendations on how to deal with harassment. And I actually, I'm meeting with the FMCSA. I've met with the FMCSA many times, different administrators. We've gone through so many different administrators lately. And it's probably going to change again under the new presidential, administration. So we need somebody to take this issue and have a passion for it. So,
I think it should be both men and women on this board, whatever it might be, so that they get a good grasp of how the other side works, that there's no misunderstanding, because that happens. Because it's old mentality that you have to change, right? And the more you hear, the more you understand, they can come to an equal agreement and then put something in writing that actually works and can be enforced. That's the problem.
Right. Well, we have an anti-harassment employment guide at Women in Trucking, and it has an expectations exchange in there. So if I said, Jeff, if you were my trainer and we were going out in the cab of a truck together, you and I would sit down, and if you said, well, I'm a liberal, and if I said I'm a conservative, then I'd say, well, then we will not talk politics. That's off the table. Or maybe religion, or maybe whatever. Or if you don't like my perfume, then I would agree to not wear it. Or if I am allergic to food that you want to eat. But you have to set those expectations in advance and say, these are my boundaries. And as far as harassment, if you tell a joke or use a term that I don't like, I'm going to tell you to not use that around me. And then if you use it again, then I'm going to report you. So you have to set those boundaries. But I mean, the whole world would be much better if we just respected people.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Something
unbelievable we have to talk about this kind of stuff today.
Well, I had another question real quick. So when I'm assuming you've talked to some of these companies that don't have as many women trainers. Is it because they're not getting as many women drivers, so they feel like, how do you keep them on staff? Or I want to say She Trucking at one point talked about maybe opening services for women driver training. I mean, are there services out there for companies to hire now?
No, and a lot of women who I talk to don't want to be trainers. They don't want a man in their truck. And so if we could solve this and have a same gender training policy, I think we'd see a lot more women stepping up saying that would be great.
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting to hear, because like you said, if some women, they don't want to do it, it's how do you get them to do that? But if they're not having to train a man, I guess you stick them with a woman. But again, you might not have as many applicants. So what does that look like?
Is it the chicken or the egg? You know, we need more female trainers, but we,
Yeah,
I think it comes down to more vetting too on both sides, because there's some things that you can miss that you think is okay until they're by themselves, and that's when all hell breaks loose. And that's probably the reason why women don't want to be put in that position, because they have no idea who's going to walk into that cab that they're going to train. And somebody says, oh no, John's a good guy, until they're 300 miles away. And then John does something that's, inappropriate. And then what do you do at that point when you're 300 miles away from your home or whatever on the road? They don't want to be put into that position, understandably, right?
Yeah, but guess who has to get out of the truck? The female trainee.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's wrong. That's totally wrong.
And I hear it over and over and over and over.
Well, we definitely have some work to do, that's for sure. I know we're coming to time, but I had two more questions. One of them is, obviously we know that you're no longer president CEO of Women in Trucking. So what are you doing with your time? And do you see yourself getting involved in something else, or are you just continuing? I know you still go to the events and speak and stuff like that, but just curious if you're loving life right now.
I am loving life right now, but I still am the founder, so I still get asked to speak. I get asked to do a lot of podcasts, so I do quite a few. And just 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a company in Charlotte. And then last week I was in Nashville before I went to the Women in Trucking conference. So I'm still doing a lot of speaking, which I love. One of my goals is to serve on carrier or for-profit boards. So if you hear of any board positions, I've got 40 some years of, background up here that I'd love to use to give back to the industry. So board positions, so I have 3 granddaughters.
Nice.
So that's part of my focus. And this is weird, and I've never told anyone this, but I've been focusing on decluttering.
Me too.
It's like, I don't need all those suits anymore that I wore for business. So it's like, I'm going to go through that. I'm going through books. I'm going through things in my basement, giving things away, giving things to my kids that they're going to get eventually anyway. So it's like, no, I'm downsizing. I'm not moving, but I'm like decluttering. And then also I try to fly as much as I can. Went up 2 weeks ago, and you're going to think this is funny, but I was looking for corn mazes from the air. Just go
That's
flying.
Interesting. So you're flying, which is awesome. So maybe you can do some touring trips with people.
Exactly. Yeah, it's been kind of rainy and gloomy here lately, but yeah, just going up. I have a Cessna Skyhawk, so just having fun doing that.
Beautiful. Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, the last question is, what piece of advice would you leave our listeners with?
Boy, over the years, I've gotten so much great advice, but there's one that kind of stuck with me, and that's assume good intent. So if somebody says something that might offend you, or if somebody does something that you think they shouldn't have done, don't think it's about you. It could be about them. I mean, like if someone cuts you off, it maybe something, they just got some horrible news, or if someone says something to you and you take it wrong, it might not be about you. So assume good intent.
I love that. I think that that's probably one of the most powerful things I have heard, because I do feel like a lot of times when I'm talking to people, especially my husband, I'm just going to throw that out there. I feel like it is always, like where he's assuming it's something different, right? And it's like, no, that's not where I'm coming from. And it's like, why do you always go to the negative, But no, I think that that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and letting me share my story.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the optimal word is listening with intent. Intent is the optimal word. People sometimes just listen and not really understanding what they heard. But if they really focus in on what's being said, the whole story changes. It's amazing when people do that, right?
Right.
Well, I wanted to thank you for, first of all, for coming on today. Second of all, for sharing your story, and also just thanking you for starting Women in Trucking, because it's made such an impact in the industry, something that we're continuing to do, you know, however many years, you know, you said 2007, like we're probably coming up on 20 years almost here in a couple years. And I think it'll continue on because women need that place, you know, where they can go and gather and talk. And I just think that it's great. You're very inspiring. So kudos to you and what you've done in the industry.
Well, Christy, I've always admired you and how far you've come in the industry. Because as you said earlier, I've met you many years ago, and you are our first distinguished woman in logistics, and you have come so far. So kudos to you. And Jeff, thank you for hosting this. You're great as well.
Appreciate that. You got to come back. But hopefully it's not going to be a year from now, maybe a little bit sooner.
That works.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today's episode of the Storytelling Chronicles, Empowering Women into Logistics. We just had an enlightening discussion with our guest, Ellen, exploring all the aspects of gender diversity, inclusion within the logistics sector. So stay connected with Ellen on social media for further insights and discussions, and LinkedIn and Women in Trucking. And lastly, a big thank you to our sponsors, Freight Validate, TAS, and Thai Software, for their unwavering support in bringing this podcast to you. Thank you.
And we will see you in 2 weeks for the Storytelling Chronicles, Empowering Women into Logistics, which will be episode 25. Can't believe it's 25 already. But with that said, the Bodacious Cowboy is out, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy the rest of your week.